The deed. My daughter thought she was coming for a signature. What she didn't know was that I had already moved every important document out of the house weeks earlier. 3 weeks later, she arrived carrying transfer papers and the kind of confidence people only have when they believe the answer is already yes. She thought she was about to become the owner of my house. What she didn't realize was that the decision had already been made. I let her believe it. Sometimes the fastest way to learn what someone really wants is to stop interrupting them while they reach for it. And my daughter was about to reach farther than she thought I would allow. My daughter called me on a Sunday evening in March. It was a kind of call that begins with, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," and leaves you standing at your kitchen window long after the conversation is over, staring into the distance and wondering when exactly your child became a stranger wearing a familiar face. Her name is Claire. She's 34 years old and works as a corporate attorney in Chicago. Claire has always been intelligent, sharp, and careful with her words. The kind of person who rarely says anything without a purpose. My name is Margaret Hollow, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 6 to 7 years old, and I spent 31 years teaching mathematics in Portland, Oregon. Teaching mathematics teaches you a lot about people. You learn that numbers don't care about feelings. They don't bend to wishful thinking. They simply tell the truth. And after 3 decades in a classroom, you become very good at recognizing the difference between someone who's honestly mistaken and someone who's hoping you won't notice what they are really doing. Claire hadn't called to talk. She had called to inform me. Dad's property on Maple Street, she said, skipping any greeting. The house, Derek and I have been discussing it. With you living alone now, it's too large and too expensive to maintain. We think it makes sense to transfer it into my name for safekeeping. Safekeeping. I remember turning that word over in my mind. It sounded comforting on the surface, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked it. My husband, Robert, had passed away 11 months earlier. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. Anyone who has lived through something like that knows there's never enough time. There's only the illusion that there might be. A few weeks before he died, Robert and I were sitting together in our bedroom. The afternoon sunlight was coming through the curtains, painting long shadows across the floor. He reached over, took my hand, and held it tightly. "Maggie," he said quietly, "don't let anyone tell you what to do with this house. Promise me." I promised him. At the time, I didn't realize how important those words would become. Standing in my kitchen almost a year later, listening to my daughter explain why the house should no longer belong to me, I thought about that promise. Promises made to the dying carry a different weight. Not because the law recognizes them. Because you do. If I signed those papers, I wouldn't just be transferring property. I'd be breaking the last promise I ever made to my husband. "Claire," I said carefully, "your father's name is still on those papers. We can have that changed." "I know we can," I replied. "What I want to know is why we should." There was a pause. Not the pause of someone searching for an answer. The pause of someone choosing which prepared answer to give. "Mom, you're alone," she said. "You don't understand property law the way I do. There are tax implications, maintenance concerns, and succession issues. It's simply easier if the property is in my name." Simpler, easier, convenient words, but none of them answered the question I had asked. Simpler for whom? I didn't say it. Not yet. Instead, I told her I would think about it. Then I hung up. For a long time, I stood by the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The same backyard where Claire learned to ride a bicycle. The same backyard where Robert spent summer evenings grilling hamburgers. The same backyard where decades of birthdays, celebrations, and ordinary family moments had quietly become memories. This wasn't just a house. It was a physical record of an entire life. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I opened Robert's desk. Inside were the documents, the title papers, the ownership records, every piece of paperwork connected to the house. I carried them to the dining room table and spent hours reading through every page. By midnight, I understood something very clearly. The house belonged to me, legally, completely, and nobody was going to take it without my permission. The next morning, I called my younger brother, Walter. If there was anyone I trusted to give me an honest opinion, it was him. Walter is 61 years old and retired now, but before that he spent 28 years working in the county assessor's office. property records, title transfers, ownership disputes. He had seen just about everything. More importantly, he'd known Claire since she was 4 years old. And unlike most people, Walter had never been particularly easy to fool. After I explained the conversation, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked a question. What exactly did she say? Word for word. I repeated the conversation as accurately as I could. When I finished, Walter let out a slow breath. She said, safekeeping? She did. Maggie, he said, if you transfer that property into Claire's name, it stops being your property. Safekeeping isn't a legal concept. Transfer is. And once that transfer is complete, you lose control of the house. I already knew that. The night before, I had spent hours reading every document in Robert's desk. I had even spoken to an attorney recommended by an old friend. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Claire knew exactly what she was asking for. I know, I told Walter. There was another pause. Then his voice became firmer. If paperwork shows up, don't sign anything without talking to me first. Not one page. I won't. And I meant it. But there was something Walter didn't know. By the time we had that conversation, I had already started making preparations. Years of teaching had taught me something valuable. Most problems become easier to solve when you deal with them before they become emergencies. That very morning, I took every important document connected to the house and removed them from Robert's desk. The originals went into my safe deposit box at the bank. I made certified copies. One set was sent to Walter. Another was placed with an attorney for safekeeping. By lunchtime, the documents were protected in 3 separate locations. If anyone expected to walk into my house and gain access to them, they were going to be disappointed. The drawer in Robert's desk no longer contained anything important. Just old utility bills, family photographs, and a collection of papers that hadn't mattered in years. Looking back, some people might call that suspicious. I call it preparation. Robert used to joke that 31 years of grading exams had made me patient. Maybe he was right. Teachers spend their lives watching people. You learn how to recognize confidence. You learn how to recognize nervousness. And you learn that people often reveal their intentions long before they realize they are revealing them. So I waited, not because I was uncertain, because I wanted to see what happened next. 3 weeks passed. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Claire arrived. She had driven all the way from Chicago herself. That told me something immediately. If she had trusted the process, she could have mailed the paperwork. Instead, she brought it personally. And she wasn't alone. Her husband, Derek, came with her. Now, Derek had always been polite, friendly, professional, the kind of man who could make almost anyone feel comfortable within 5 minutes of meeting him. But there was something about him I had never quite been able to define. He reminded me of a salesman who was always working, even when he wasn't technically selling anything. The moment they stepped inside, I knew this wasn't a family visit. This was a business meeting. I made tea anyway. Old habits die hard. The 3 of us sat in the living room. Claire placed a folder on the coffee table between us. Derek smiled, a confident smile. The smile of someone who believes everything is going according to plan. "We've taken care of everything," he said. He opened the folder. Inside were several documents, transfer forms, property paperwork, title applications, every page neatly organized, every signature line marked with small adhesive tabs. Someone had spent time preparing this. A lot of time. "Mom," Derek said, sliding the papers toward me. "It's very simple. Just a few signatures and everything is handled." I looked down at the documents. Then I looked at Claire. She was watching me carefully, not nervously, expectantly, as if she was already imagining the drive home after everything had been signed. I turned another page, then another. Finally, I asked a simple question. "Where are the original title documents?" The room became very still. For a second, neither of them answered. Then Claire spoke. "We'll handle those. I'd like to see them first. They're already being processed." I nodded slowly. On the surface, her answer sounded reasonable, but something about it didn't fit. And judging by the brief look Derek gave her, he knew it too. For the first time that afternoon, the confidence in the room shifted slightly. Only slightly, but enough for me to notice. And after 31 years in a classroom, noticing small changes had become second nature. The conversation was about to become much more interesting. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The folder of documents sat on the coffee table between us. Claire looked at me. I looked back at her. Then I asked the question again. Where are the original title documents? This time, Derek answered. They are being processed. His response came a little too quickly. The kind of answer people give when they want a conversation to move on before anyone starts asking more questions. I folded my hands in my lap. Process where? Another pause. A small one, but it was there. Claire shifted slightly in her seat. The registrar's office. I nodded. Then I stood up. Neither of them expected that. Without saying a word, I walked across the room toward Robert's old desk. I opened the drawer. For a brief moment, I noticed both of them watching closely, especially Derek. His eyes never left the drawer. I reached inside and pulled out a thick folder. Then I returned to my chair and placed it carefully on the coffee table. Claire leaned forward. So did Derek. I opened the folder. Family photographs, school pictures, old report cards, a faded photograph from a summer vacation 20 years earlier. Nothing else. The change in Derek's expression lasted less than a second. But I saw it. The look of someone expecting to find something valuable, and realizing it wasn't there. I closed the folder again. Then I smiled politely. I moved the important document several weeks ago. Nobody spoke. The originals are in my safe deposit box. I let the words settle. Certified copies have already been provided to my brother Walter. I paused, and another set is being held by an attorney. Claire blinked. What attorney? Sandra Pierce. The room became very quiet. The confidence that had filled the room when they arrived was gone now. Not completely, but enough that everyone could feel it. For the first time that afternoon, Claire looked surprised. Not angry. Surprised. As though she had just discovered a version of her mother she hadn't expected to meet. Mom. I held up a hand. No. My voice remained calm. Steady. The same voice I used for years when a classroom became noisy and I needed everyone's attention. Not loud. Not emotional. Just certain. I am not signing those documents. Neither Claire nor Derek moved. Not today. I looked directly at the papers. Not next week. Then I looked directly at my daughter. Not ever. Claire stared at me. You don't understand. No, I interrupted gently. I understand perfectly. The words landed harder than I intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as they needed to. I leaned back in my chair. I spent 31 years teaching mathematics. I looked at the paperwork. I understand numbers. I looked at Claire, and I understand documents. Then I added quietly, I understood these documents before you drove here. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said. Derek finally cleared his throat. Margaret, we're only trying to help. The statement sounded practiced, polished, as though he'd used similar words before. Maybe he had. Maybe not. Either way, I wasn't interested. I turned toward him. Derek, may I ask you something? His smile returned. Carefully. Of course. How is your firm doing? The smile disappeared immediately. Just like that. Gone. For the first time all afternoon, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Claire looked at him, then back at me. Neither spoke. I decided to continue. I read the news. I kept my tone neutral. I also speak to people. The room remained silent. Financial pressure can make good people consider bad ideas. Derek's face hardened. Claire looked down at the floor. And suddenly everything that had felt hidden a few minutes earlier no longer felt hidden at all. Nobody argued. Nobody denied anything. Sometimes silence confirms more than words ever could. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. Not the attorney. Not the woman sitting across from me with legal documents. Just my daughter. The little girl who once sat on the same floor learning multiplication tables. The little girl whose father adored her. The little girl who had stood beside his hospital bed less than a year earlier. You were there, I said softly. Claire's eyes lifted toward mine. You heard your father ask me to keep this house. Her expression changed, only slightly, but enough. "You heard the promise." Neither of us looked away. For a moment, she wasn't a lawyer, and I wasn't defending property. We were simply a daughter and a mother standing on opposite sides of a difficult truth. Her chin trembled, just once. Then she forced it still. "So that's it." Her voice sounded smaller now, less certain, less prepared. I nodded. "That's it." Nobody spoke. Outside, somewhere beyond the living room window, a dog barked. A car passed down the street. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life continuing. While inside the room, something important had quietly ended. I folded my hands together. "You're welcome in this house anytime." Claire looked at me. "You'll always be welcome." I paused. "You can come for coffee, for dinner, for Christmas, for absolutely any reason a daughter visits a mother." Then I glanced at the paperwork. "But you are not taking this house." The words were calm, firm, final, and for the first time since arriving, neither Claire nor Derek had an argument left to make. For a long moment, nobody moved. The papers remained untouched on the coffee table. The tea I had served earlier had gone cold, and the conversation, despite all the preparation that had gone into it, was over. Derek was the first to stand. Slowly, carefully, the confidence he had arrived with was gone now, not replaced by anger. Exactly. More like disappointment. The disappointment of someone realizing a plan isn't going to work no matter how many times they explain it. "We should get going," he said quietly. Claire nodded. She stood without saying anything. For a second, I thought she might argue, might try one last time to change my mind. But she didn't. Somewhere deep down, she already knew there was no point. When I make a decision, I make it completely. That was something Robert used to tease me about. He'd say I could spend 3 weeks thinking about a choice and 3 seconds making it. Once my mind was made up, it stayed made up. I walked them to the front door. Nobody spoke much. The silence wasn't hostile. It was heavier than that. It was a silence that appears when people finally stop pretending. At the doorway, Claire paused. Her hand rested on the doorknob. For a few seconds she stared at the floor. Then she asked a question. "How did you know?" I looked at her. "Know what?" "About Derek's farm." Her voice was almost a whisper. I thought about the answer. Then I smiled sadly. "Because you called me on a Sunday." She frowned. "I don't understand." "Your father called me every Sunday for 35 years. I paused. "Do you know how many Sunday evening calls I've received from you over the last decade?" Claire didn't answer. "Almost none." The truth landed gently, but it landed. When you called, you didn't ask how I was doing. I kept my voice calm. You didn't ask about the house. You didn't ask about the garden. You asked about ownership. For the first time that afternoon, Claire looked away. I continued. That made me curious. And once I became curious, I started paying attention. Nobody spoke. Finally, Claire nodded. A small nod. The kind people give when they know the explanation is fair, even if they don't like it. Then she opened the door and left. Derek followed. A moment later, their car disappeared down Maple Street. I stood in the doorway for a while after they were gone. Not because I was upset, because endings deserve a moment of silence, even when they are necessary. Eventually, I closed the door and returned to the kitchen. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as though something had finally settled into its proper place. I made myself another cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the evening sun was beginning to disappear behind the trees. The same trees Robert used to trim every spring. The same view we'd shared for decades. And for the first time in weeks, I felt peaceful. Not victorious, just certain. There is a difference. The following weekend, Walter drove up from Salem. We spent most of Saturday afternoon sitting on the back porch. The porch had always been Robert's favorite place in the house. He used to sit there every morning with a newspaper and a cup of coffee, convinced he could solve the world's problems before breakfast. I told Walter everything, from the moment Claire arrived to the moment she left. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly. "You moved the documents before they even got here." I smiled. The week after she called. Walter laughed. Not loudly, just the kind of laugh that comes from being proven right about someone. You know, he said, Robert always used to say the same thing about you. What thing? That you were always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I looked out toward the garden. The roses needed trimming. The fence needed paint. There was always something that needed attention around a house this old. Robert was wrong, I said. Walter raised an eyebrow. He was. I nodded. I wasn't 3 steps ahead. What were you then? I smiled. I was paying attention. Walter laughed again, this time a little harder. Same thing, Maggie. Maybe he was right. Maybe there isn't much difference. Because most of the time, people tell you exactly who they are, exactly what they want, exactly what they are planning. The problem is that nobody listens carefully enough to hear it. We sat on the porch until the sun disappeared completely, talking about Robert, talking about old memories, talking about nothing important at all. And by the time Walter left the next morning, I realized something. The house needed repairs. The garden needed work. Living alone wasn't always easy. But every challenge that came with this place belonged to me. And strangely enough, that felt like a gift. Not a burden. A gift. 6 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Claire. This time, there was no Derek in the background. No paperwork. No urgency. No carefully prepared arguments. Just my daughter. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took a breath. Mom, I need to say something. I leaned back in my chair. The evening sunlight was coming through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the floor. Go ahead. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that happens when someone is deciding whether they are finally ready to tell the truth. When Claire spoke again, her voice was quieter than usual. Dad would have been angry with me. I looked out toward the backyard, toward the garden Robert loved, toward the house he had fought so hard to leave behind for me. Yes, I said softly, he would have. Another silence. Then she asked a question I hadn't expected. Are you angry? I thought about it carefully. Not the way people answer when they want to sound kind. The way you answer when honesty matters more than comfort. Finally, I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, Claire didn't speak. I'm disappointed. I paused, but disappointment and anger aren't the same thing. The line remained quiet. Then I continued. I'm tired, Claire. Tired of pretending I don't see what I see. Tired of pretending I don't understand what's happening around me. And tired of people assuming age means confusion. For several seconds, all I heard was her breathing. Then she spoke. I know. And for the first time in months, I believed her, because there was no performance in her voice, no strategy, no legal language, just honesty, raw and uncomfortable, the way honesty usually is. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. The words came out small, almost fragile. I closed my eyes, because the truth was, I didn't know how to fix it either. Some things aren't repaired with one conversation. Some wounds need time. Trust especially. Trust doesn't return because someone apologizes. It returns because people start acting differently. Day after day. Choice after choice. Still, everyone has to start somewhere. So I gave her the only answer that felt honest. Start by telling me the truth. Silence. Then I continued. The truth about Derek's farm. The truth about the house. The truth about why you wanted it. The truth about everything. I took a breath. I'm your mother, Claire. I've handled difficult truths my entire life. What I can't handle is being lied to. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally, she said one word. Okay. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't magically fix our relationship. But it was real. And sometimes real is enough. Sometimes healing begins with a single honest word. Life moved forward after that. Slowly, the way life always does. The roof repair above the kitchen was finally completed in May. The garden improved. The roses came back stronger than the year before. Walter still visited every few months. He still drank too much coffee. Still argued with me about baseball. Still claimed he was right even when he clearly wasn't. Some things never change. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. Claire calls more often now. Not every week, not every Sunday, but often enough. Sometimes we talk for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour. Most of the conversations aren't about anything important. The weather, work, family stories, memories of Robert, ordinary things. The kind of things people forget to appreciate until they almost lose them. I don't know exactly what Claire and I become from here. Maybe we're rebuilding. Maybe we're simply learning each other again. Either way, that's enough for now. Because family isn't a problem that gets solved. It's something you keep showing up for. Patiently, carefully, with your eyes open, and occasionally, with your important documents stored somewhere safe. I still live in the house on Maple Street. The same house Robert and I bought all those years ago. The same house where we built a life. The same house where we raised a daughter. The same house filled with memories that don't appear on any legal document. Sometimes I sit on the back porch in the evening and think about the promise I made to Robert, the one he asked for near the end. Back then, I thought he was asking me to protect the house. Now I think he was asking for something else. Something much more important. He was asking me to protect my right to choose, my right to decide, my right to remain the author of my own life. And when I think about it that way, I realize something. In the end, I didn't save the house. The house was never the point. What I saved was a right to decide what happened to it. Because sometimes, that's the first thing people try to take from you. And sometimes, it's the most important thing you'll ever protect. Robert knew exactly who he was asking when he made me that promise. And I like to think, all these months later, he would be proud that I kept it. The house is still here. The garden is still growing. The memories are still alive. And so am I, still deciding, still paying attention, still keeping my promises. And that, I think, is more valuable than any deed could ever be.